My mother's fiancé took my $7,000 college money, and my family spent my father's fortune without informing me. My maternal grandparents are making me angry after my mother and her fiancé were detained. I had a valid reason to call the cops on them, thus this happened. My mother and I never got along, especially since my father died 10 years ago. Right now I'm 17. In a few months, I should be starting college. I recognized I'd have to work for myself and make my own plans because, unfortunately, my mother would never have saved any money for me. I started working at 14 years old. After school, I'd work part-time. For 4 years, I had been saving to have some money set away. I'd also save it because I generally get cash from my relatives for birthdays and holidays. I was relieved to have saved over $7,000 thus far. Of course, it was all in cash, which I carefully placed in a small wooden box my father had made for me in a nook of my cupboard. My mother never allowed me to create a bank account, so that was out of the question as I never had one. I never told my mother or anybody else about the money, so I'm not sure how they came across it. Still, a few days ago I realized that the box was completely empty. When I asked my mother about it, she told me that her fiancé had taken the money to put toward his new property. Finding out what had happened drove me completely nuts. My mother and her fiancé were on one side of the heated debate at home, while I was on the other. Ultimately, I am only 17 and they are currently in power, so I had to make a compromise. This was my life. So all I could do was walk up to my room, close myself in, and scream for hours because I would have to start over again. Before college, I was unsure whether I could save enough money for anything. I felt completely dejected and lost. That day, I developed my mental image. Because it could not be unpacked, I planned to exact revenge on them. Despite the fact that there was a lot of choice, fortunately I was able to exact revenge precisely 3 days later. They have now been detained and are facing the consequences of their actions. My only difficulty with this circumstance is that my grandparents, who have always been on my side, are now against me, which makes no sense. I've known my mother's fiancé Rob for the past 2 years. I detested every moment of it since he is one of the most nasty people I have ever encountered. I'd even consider him abusive, clearly expressed vocally and emotionally rather than physically. My mother usually bears the brunt of it, but he occasionally loses patience with me and says anything comes to mind. He curses me out, tries his hardest to make me cry like my mother, and gets more angrier when he realizes I don't care. This causes him to lose even more control over his mouth and his words. My mother never bothered to defend me. For the first few years after my father left, my mother did not date anyone. Then she met Rob later. He was nice and reasonable for the first couple months. However, following their first serious dispute, he began to show his true colors. 6 months into their marriage, he had moved in with us and began to manipulate my mother. He couldn't keep up with his work and was a deadbeat, no good moron. Contextually, he is in his mid to late 30s and occasionally relies on his parents for money because he has absolutely no financial sense and spends more money than he earns. He borrows money from his folks while he is fighting with my mother. When he isn't, he's content enough to leech off her. The terrible problem is that my mother is not very wealthy. She earns a fair living, but not enough to support Rob's extravagant lifestyle. She is a floor supervisor at our local supermarket. Still, I never allowed it to bother me. I constantly aspire to be as self-sufficient as possible. Since the age of 14, I have refrained from asking my mother anything more than the fundamentals. I wouldn't even ask her to pay for them until I started working part-time. I rely heavily on her for shelter and food. I never ask her to get me anything. That is all. I realize that even expecting that is ridiculous, so I don't expect her to do anything else for me. She has made it quite clear from the start that she despises me. She never treated me properly, even as a small child, and I always felt as if she didn't want me. As I grew older, that impression became a belief. Previously, I could rely on my father to defend me from my mother if she became enraged with me. But once he left, I was on my own, as I have been for the past few years. Things got worse when Rob arrived, but I always consoled myself by reminding myself that soon I'd be gone to college and wouldn't have to worry about anything. That seems gloomy and unlikely right now. I stayed in my room and did nothing for 3 days after my money was taken away because I was so upset. We moved into our new home on the same day I learned that all of my money had been taken. I completed all of the needed tasks, but I avoided speaking with either of the two people living with me. They didn't seem any worse for it. My mother told me to prepare for the evening housewarming party on the 3rd day. After having my money taken from me, I began ranting at her and telling her that I would not be doing such things. Their only means of obtaining this property had been the money they stole from me. That really infuriated my mother. Referring to the fact that she had raised me, she encouraged me to be grateful for them now that we were finally living in our own home, rather than a rented place, and to just suck it up and let things go because I owed them for life anyway. This is not even reasonable because she was legally compelled to do it, and she did not do me any big benefit. The house was plenty big enough for the 3 of us. I know they bought this house expressly to impress everyone with their elegant address and spacious home. I was rather irritated that day, so I decided to call my father's folks, something I hadn't done before. It was complicated because my paternal grandparents had cut off touch with our family when my father died. I guess it hurt too much for them to stay in touch. They cut ties and we stopped communicating. I'm not sure why, but I still had their phone numbers, so as a last resort, I called them because my mother's grandparents, with whom I had a stronger relationship, were fairly impartial in this matter. I notified my mother's parents about the day my money was stolen, expecting them to contact her and help me resolve the situation. On the plus side, we'd finally have our own place and won't have to worry about rent. They simply voiced their happiness that my mother was able to acquire a new home. They told me to look for the silver lining. Their attitude surprised me because, up until now, they had always understood me. They would discreetly back me but never challenge my mother. This time was different, and I couldn't understand it. I avoided them once again since I was irritated with them. That same day, when my mother recommended me to swallow it, I contacted my paternal grandparents to seek an alternative response, one that would provide some future hope. It was simply a gut feeling. Fortunately, they answered the phone. I told them everything right away. I told them I knew they were hurt and didn't want to keep in touch, but this was an emergency and I thought my father would have wanted them to help me if he was still alive. I informed them that my mother had taken all of my savings, which I had been accumulating for over a few years, to pay for college. I had no idea if it was even possible anymore. After listening to me, my grandfather began something that perplexed me. He informed me that my father had left a college fund for me, so he didn't understand why I needed to save money independently. That news astonished me because my mother had never mentioned a college fund, and I had never asked her, because I assumed she hadn't saved anything for me. Knowing his death was very likely, I had completely forgotten what my father could have done for me before he died. He died young, so I assumed he didn't have time to arrange for me. My grandparents told me this, and I was amazed. Furious and annoyed, I inquired if they had any documents or evidence I could use against my mother. They promised to look into something and contact me later. I stayed in my room for several hours, working to put everything together. I discovered that Rob and my mother had definitely collaborated and used my college funds to acquire this property. According to what I knew, my mother did not make enough money to buy the house. Rob had not worked in 3 months, so I questioned whether he could afford such a property. I would then report them to the police. All I needed was anything to validate this. After a few hours of waiting, my grandparents contacted me and sent me images of certain documents my mother had signed, stating that she would use the money my father left her to pay for my college tuition and ensure I had a comfortable life. She had done everything but ensure that my life was comfortable, so reading that made me laugh out loud. She did go out of her way to make my life more uncomfortable. Still, mother had signed those documents, and it irritated me that my grandparents had never discussed it before. After my father died, they simply abandoned me. My mother had not truly been there for me. Despite the fact that I believe it was all a show, my mother and grandparents made an effort to support me. My father's parents were too preoccupied with their own grief to consider my situation. When I asked why they hadn't showed me these papers before, my grandparents responded really poorly. I was too young at the time. They informed me they had sort of forgotten about it when my father died. And when I got older, we stopped speaking, and it had slipped their minds since they were also becoming older. I just let it go because I couldn't contest AITA. When I received the evidence, I called a friend whose father was on the force and stated that I needed his help. So just as the housewarming party began, my friend's father arrived with another cop and a lawyer to arrest my mother and her fiancé. Their pledge had clearly been broken, and the issue was more than just that. My mother had virtually put herself up to a lawsuit by going against what she had pledged, therefore violating the provisions of the agreement she had signed all those years before. My mother and Rob were eventually arrested while I was showing the party guests everything. In my life, I had never felt more vindicated. Almost everyone they had hoped to impress, including several ex-coworkers and friends, was horrified to see them uncovered and brought away in handcuffs. They continued to stare at me as if I had done something wrong. Even then, they were too smug and arrogant. My mother's grandparents were also at the party when their daughter was led away in handcuffs, and they were enraged and avoided speaking with me afterward. I was alone in the house after everyone had left and had no idea what to do. Despite being detained, they would most likely be released on bail in a few hours, so I was devastated. Furthermore, proving anything would take months, even if I planned to charge them. Even if they were able to turn things around for themselves, they had a good chance of getting off the hook. I wouldn't collect the money I was owed until then. There was no telling what might happen. Regardless, I would still lose out. The names on the deed were Rob and Mom's, not mine, so I can't exactly sell the house either. Even if I wanted to legally compel her to sell the house and pay me the money, I would need to hire a lawyer. Now that my friend and his father had kindly offered to assist with the organization of everything, I was no longer concerned about the cost. They informed me that I shouldn't worry because they understand what I'm going through and live nearby. I'm not sure what to do now. Worse, the few people that supported me are no longer in contact with me. My mother's grandparents refused to talk to me because they believe I have been unappreciative. They said that they knew I didn't get along with my mother, but sending her to jail for something like this didn't sit well with them given everything she had done for me. Their unwillingness to interact with me really irritated me. I feel very alone right now. Although I may have defeated Rob and my mother right now, I believe I have lost significantly more in the long run. I simply feel powerless right now and don't know what to do. Am I the asshole for putting my mother and her fiancé in jail for stealing my money to pay for their new home? Update 1. Hello from the house Rob and my mother bought. I've moved. I denounced them to the police a week ago, which is why they were released after 48 hours in detention and returned home. When I learned they were returning, I decided to leave immediately away because I didn't want to face any confrontation. I stepped out when they arrived because I had already packed my possessions. Though I didn't want to talk to them, they persuaded me to stop and converse. I departed as quickly as I could. After calling a taxi, I got in and drove straight to my friend's house, where I had spent the previous 3 days. For the record, this is the same friend whose father helped with the lawyer and arrest. Now, the lawyer, my friend's father, and I work together every day to figure out how to get things done as quickly as possible. I am fairly desperate at the moment, therefore I am willing to reach a compromise. We've booked a meeting with their attorney in the coming days. And what about a court-appointed mediator? The negotiations will reveal how things progress. Should they reject my proposals, we will have to take this to court, which might take some time. Though I want things to be fair, I'm doing my best to reach a solution. I want the money I need to finish school. For the time being, my friend's father has informed me that they will provide me with financial assistance. However, I am hesitant to accept financial assistance from anyone else because it appears weird. My grandparents have not contacted me yet. Clearly, my father's parents and my mother's grandparents stopped talking to me after sending me images of the documentation. Apart from that, we haven't interacted yet. I personally obtained such records from them in order to present additional concrete evidence. They seemed unconcerned about the matter, even when I approached them to retrieve the records. Though they wished me well, they made no offer of assistance or even an invitation to visit or interview. Since their behavior has been absolutely unusual for me to deal with, I truly don't know what's going on with them. So far, results have been quite disappointing. Nonetheless, I want to overcome this quickly so that I can enter college. To be honest, that is all I am going by right now. Of course, my friends are quite helpful, which I much appreciate given that I now have no family. Only these people are genuinely concerned about me. Update 2. Hello. I am not sure what to say right now because there has been an interesting development. What I discovered was horrific. As a result, I'm physically shaking with wrath. Once again, this is pretty doubtful, but my mother provided screenshots, so I'm not sure what to trust. My mother emailed me today, just a few hours ago. There were just 2 days till our mediation appointment. She stated she really should talk to me. She couldn't reach me since I had blocked her everywhere else. But she created a new email account and gave me something that completely ruined what I knew to be true. I shall therefore not squander time. I'll simply get straight to the point. My entire family planned against me. Indeed, the reason all of my grandparents have been so bizarre throughout the process is because they have all been involved from the beginning. Not only had my mother squandered the money my father had left for me, but everyone else had taken their due part and kept their mouths shut in return. Because she had dirt on them, I finally understand why my maternal grandparents were outraged that I had reported my mother to the police, and why they always appeared to be concerned for me, but never truly stood up for me when it came to her. I now understand why my paternal grandparents never informed me that the signed papers my mother had left existed until I asked them. My mother emailed me evidence that every one of them was involved in this. She spoke to them when I was about 14 or 15 years old. She was fortunate to have all of this on file because they had been stupid enough to exchange these emails. She emailed me screenshots of the emails. My mother persuaded me that since I had arrested her, I should also involve these people in the case. Because it wouldn't be fair to penalize her when they had all conspired against me to hide the money and keep it for themselves. My father left a large sum of money for me, and everyone, including his attorney, decided it was best if they kept it from me and spent it on themselves. This still seems unbelievable to me. I've read that email several times, trying to make sense of it because it seems absurd that everyone, even my father's own parents, was against me. It's really rather fantastic. Their conscience had finally kicked in and they had a change of heart, which is why they had alerted me about the papers my mother had signed and given me the evidence recently, when I called them for help. They opted to give me the truth because they knew what they were doing was wrong. My mother and her parents had urged them not to tell me the truth since it would bring them down, but they had already planned to do so. They had assured me that they would not come to tell me everything, but if I ever asked, they would undoubtedly be honest. All of this came to light when I asked if there was anything they could do to help. They elected to provide such records as proof. Though I am glad they decided to help me back then, it does not clear them. It also explains their weird and distant demeanor even after assisting me, since they were guilty. They are deeply humiliated, as they should be, but they refuse to accept responsibility for what they did. Right now, however, my brain is simply not working properly. I simply know how to manage any of this. I don't know what to believe in. I haven't even told my pal about what I discovered because it is so broad and is literally driving me insane. All at once I am tricked, hurt, and outraged. Right now I don't know what to do with these feelings. Given the significance of this discovery, which we will undoubtedly bring up during negotiations, I must consult with my attorney. My mother attempted to turn the tide against those who exposed her, oblivious to the fact that she would miss out on many things as a result of this process. She told me all of this. And I'm glad she did, because I believe I should have known that. Except from a few people, no one on this earth has my back. I guess this is how it is because I can't rely on anyone. The only thing left to do is inform my friend so that he may notify his father. Then we can all meet with my lawyer to discuss what we should do about this and the next steps. Still, I'm very confident I'll be attending college this year. I'm not going to waver. I made up my mind. I am prepared to ask a friend's father for help. I think I'll ask him to co-sign my loan application. I'm not asking him to pay my college fees right now. Update 3. Hello, so we met with the mediator today, and as I previously stated, I very clearly conveyed what my mother had told me in the email. She basically admitted to everything she had done, and now she will have to pay for the money she and the rest of my family had stolen from me. She also stated that some of the money went toward my upbringing, so we shouldn't hold it against her or demand her to reimburse any of the funds taken. I don't buy it, though. My grandparents must also do their part. They stole not only the money, but also my hopes and dreams. I want them to give it back to me so I can live a dignified life. I am no longer going to be reliant. My friend's father and my attorney both warned me that, while these types of incidents are not uncommon, they do not reduce the cunning and nasty nature of them. They, like me, were outraged, and rightfully so. They promised me that they would make sure I never had to rely on anyone else for money in my life. After my father died, the money they stole would have kept me comfortable for every year of my life. Despite his efforts to ensure my happiness, my family thought it unacceptable. They were just selfish, therefore they had to be taken away from me. That won't fly with me anymore. After our chat, my attorney and I agreed to go for the throat. There is no reason for us to back down and let them have it, especially when it is on my expense. Even if the conditions were tough, one thing is certain. We will meet again, and this time all of my grandparents will be present, as they have definitely been involved in this. Things may go to court, but until then, I'll be dealing with the student loan. I will ensure that I receive justice. More than justice, I need to recover money stolen from me. Because the money was intended for me and no one else, they all had to reimburse me. Although my mother consented, they also broke their promise to my father to keep me secure and content. I never want to see them again because they are all failures. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so and click the notification bell to remain updated on more disturbing real-life tales happening around you.